to fall in there. But I will continue the discourse about bringing the bodies back in my presentation, where I want to share with you some thoughts on a recent initiative of mine, in which I'm looking at the rich culture of improvisation as a framework for understanding and developing interactions with and within responsive environments and artifacts in networked cities. The increasing pervasiveness of embedded and mobile network devices in urban environments has transformed what used to be static, passive backdrop for human activity into spaces and objects that have a more fluid behavior. These objects and environments are capable of sensing, computing, and acting in real time. They can change their behavior in relation to their own system states, their histories of past actions and interactions, the behavior of humans and machines within their reach or environmental conditions. Augmented environments of this kind have the potential to go beyond simple action-reaction couplings and become truly interactive, displaying a dynamic and responsive behavior that engages with their human counterparts in dynamics that resemble that of an improvisation. The work on the networked nature of cities has started for me during my previous tenure leading the real-time city group at MIT's Sensible City Lab before joining Northeast. And together with my colleagues, we developed what would become the Live Singapore project and platform, an urban real-time data platform that enabled bringing together live data from many of the city's key urban systems, such as energy, transportation, telecommunications, etc., both for analysis and visualization. I'm currently working on a project based on energy and other kinds of data related to Northeastern University's campus, looking at a campus as a kind of city in a city model, and which will be showcased at Gallery 360 from mid next month onwards, so whoever's around, feel welcome to stop by. The motivation in these projects and similar projects is in a way to find ways to bring data into a conversation with citizens and enabling feedback loops in a complex environment such as a city on various levels. Developing these real-time maps of a city is a constellation that I described earlier, somatic and Gilles Deleuze's sense, where all parts are connected in non-hierarchical ways, and every act of drawing the map of these systems becomes in itself a part of the map that is being drawn, leading to endless recursions. These and similar initiatives stand for a city in which large amounts of information is generated in networks incidental to human activity and available in real time. Planning becomes ever more fluid and moves ever closer to the moment of action itself. And artifacts and environments become capable of ad hoc behaviors that take into account what happens in their environment. The question that I'm interested in now is how to conceptualize the interaction with such an activated and responsive urban environment. How can we frame that? To talk about an interface, something that stands in between, was an effective conceptual model to contemplate on human product interactions before the dawn of computerization, when configurations are fixed, such in the case of a chair, of levers, of telephone dials, buttons, etc. But the plasticity of the nature of human-computer interfaces created new challenges and opportunities. The notions of conversation and then common ground were used as a new framework for human-computer interaction, suggesting a model where meaning is negotiated and between human and computer through interactions. In this sense, interface is no longer a simple notion by which human and computer represent themselves to one another. Rather, it forms a shared context for action which both are agents in an Aristotelian sense, and Brenda Laurel developed the concept of interface as a theatrical stage for the performance of intentional activity in which both human and computers have a role. It is concerned with representing whole actions that involve multiple agents, which is the very definition of drama. Laurel's framework is based on an analysis of some of theater's fundamental principles, such as the 6 basic elements of tragedy as outlined by Aristotle in his Poetics, which are action, character, thought, language, melody, spectacle. But while this framework looks at forms of scripted theater and has opened interesting new ground, there are limitations to that framework in it being scripted. In scripted theater, unlike real life, the process of choice and decision-making takes place during the rehearsal and practice and not during the actual staging of the performance. However, in improvisational techniques, as in real life, anything can happen. Actions are situated in a context and always in flux. Situations are essentially unique. The focus is on dynamic choice in a dynamic environment. Improvisation is a model that can more closely frame the process of human-computer interaction in real life. There is a historic link between cities and improvisation. With origins dating back to the early 16th century, the Commedia dell'arte is strongly intertwined with the cities of the Italian peninsula, then not unified into a single state. The Commedia dell'arte was the first professional form of actors' groups, a traveling business enterprise based on improvisation. Based on a schema or a scenario, actors would improvise performances, the specific reasons why the actors' performances were improvised instead of scripted. For once, improvisation worked well as it allowed to adapt the performance to local languages and dialects, of which there were many at the Italian peninsula and still are. The story, second, could be adapted to timely local events and the political situation at hand. And third, but not least, in not working off of written scripts, the performers avoided being prone to political censorship. No text, no censorship of that text. The subversiveness of acting in a moment is also what Michel de Certeau describes, focusing on the innumerable practices of ways of operating, the everyday tactics by means of which users reappropriate space, organized by powerful strategies and techniques of sociocultural production. How do people take shortcuts between the proposed paths? What do people actually do with systems put in place for them to consume? What clandestine forms existing practices and procedures of everyday interactions relative to structures of expectation, negotiation, and improvisation? So let's take a closer look at improvisation. Its Latin root proviso indicates a condition attached to an agreement, a stipulation done beforehand, and together with the prefix improvisation indicates that which has not been agreed upon before, it deals with the unforeseen. That which has not been provided or planned for and presents itself as an unexpected. Improvisation is a process that is often misunderstood. A common interpretation is that when something is improvised, it is to make up for a lack of something. It is often used to indicate doing something in a makeshift manner, in a usually crude and temporary expedient. To improvise, that is to get by in some way until the plan that was lost is found again and recovered. In the art, the performative turn has brought attention to the performance as an event in time and place, shared by performers and audience as a unique experience. Social sciences, humanities, architecture, and design have since experienced their own performative turn, and this has also brought attention to improvisation in new ways. To improvise is associated generally with an extemporaneous way of acting and playing. Particularly in context of jazz music, it refers to a playing in the moment, a composition in the flow. It is, and it is key, a dynamic in which the act of planning and the act of execution coincide, and where during the act of execution, the situation at hand continues to feed into what is being played, a process characterized by simultaneity of both conception and presentation. While they are performing their ideas, artists must learn to juggle short and intermediate range goals simultaneously. Paul Berliner. In Kant, the definition of a genius is he who is capable of the utmost original act, free from all that was before, disrupting any previous convention or norm. Jacques Derrida describes instead the impossibility of total originality due to an ever-present repetition of past structures. The improvised act in practice is found probably somewhere between these antipodes. We underestimate the investment in attention, study, and practice that is the foundation for every improvised performance. Together with an astute awareness of self and of others, an improvisation is based to a critical extent on artists' past practice and experience. As artists improvise, they elaborate on existing material in relation to the unforeseen ideas that emerge out of the context and the unique conditions of the performance in an ongoing process of repetition and variation. An original systems-based perspective on improvisation was proposed by Edgar Landgraf in reference to Niklas Luhmann's work in systems theory, and I believe it provides many hooks for the design discipline. Improvisation overcomes several dichotomies instilled by modern thought. Its practice overcomes clear distinctions between repetition and novelty, discipline and spontaneity, security and risk, and group, and ultimately order and disorder. It overcomes a distinction between these poles by doing away with the binary opposition and embracing a mind frame of complexity in which order and disorder, information and noise form a mutually constitutive relationship. In improvisation, that is, many actions do not receive their full meaning until after the act has occurred. What one actor does will redefine the meaning of the previous action of another actor, which again will be conditioned by the following action. We're dealing with recursive processes that define themselves, as their definition cannot be attributed to the intention of a single or even all participant actors. By conceiving improvisation as an iterative and recursively operating process where dynamic structures emerge from the processing and reprocessing of elements, not only do we capture more of the essence of the practice, but this also enables us to identify structures in a process that can at first appear. Adapting a systems view of improvisation makes the tension between the notions of stability and variation a productive one. The dynamics of change and variation become an integral part of the repetitions and interaction among performers and the environment. There's already an existing trajectory of projects that share some characteristics of improvisation. The Holozoic series by Philip Beasley, for example, cyber-physical plant-like structures that are composed of a multitude of sensors and actuators that compose an ambient installation that generates its own patterns of movement while interacting with people as they move between structures. Slothbots, part of Mike Phillips' ArcOS project, are large autonomous and box-like robots that move only very slowly and unperceivably to the human occupants of the space. And by doing so, they reconfigure the physical architecture over time as a result of their interactions with people. Slothbots pick up on the use of space they are in and how it changes throughout the day, and they reproduce themselves in anticipation of new interactions with the building occupants. And cloud seeding, which is a dynamic shading system by Modu, installed in Israel, that turns a shading structure from a static entity animated predictably by the sun alone into a dynamic interplay between moving shades. Wind animates balls on a net structure, casting shadow patches on a public square in unpredictable but perceivable ways. Visitors engaged by rearranging public furniture around the behavior of these shades that move in somewhat unforeseen yet accountable ways. This is an initiative I've started recently at Northeastern, where we're working together with the School of Engineering and theater, specifically with Viewpoint's improvisational actors, monitoring and exploring their way of engaging with the possibilities of space as we develop interactive and responsive environments. Playstock is a project I developed together with Bradley Cantrell, a colleague from GSD, where this concrete structure with a talking head pulls in fragments of hyperlocal online conversations that it proposes to people, sensing proximity of people and extending discourses, and in some way bringing back conversations that have sort of left the public space, physical public space, into the digital domain and reproposing them in the physical public environment, and also engaging with people, recording messages, and becoming part of a conversation in public places. And Dancing Shades is a recent project of mine by Asian and particularly Japanese fan-like structures that pick up on pedestrians' movements and behaviors, opening and closing both to create shade, to offer shade in very playful and propositive ways. Projects such as these already contain to different degrees elements of improvisational dynamics. And moving forward, improvisation seems apt to play a foundational role in designing interactions. A number of systems for improvisational performance have documented their frameworks, which are a rich resource capable to quite directly inform the design approach. Viewpoint's improvisation is an interesting example for the scope of this discussion. It was first developed by Marlee Overlee in the 1970s and later formalized by Anne Bogart and Tina Landau. And Viewpoints represents a defined procedure and attitude that is non-hierarchical, practical, and collaborative in nature. It focuses on engaging actors as co-creators in a process in which acting is experienced as a collective discovery of acts that dynamically and recursively respond to the questions that arise or emerge during improvisation. In Viewpoints, individual and collective activity emerges in real time, based on actors' heightened awareness and immediate response to any of 9 viewpoints that are temporal and spatial in nature, and which are tempo, duration, kinesthetic response, repetition on the temporal front, and spatial relations, topography, shape, gesture, and architecture on the spatial front. Each of these 9 viewpoints actors use to dynamically engage with their environment represents a potentially constitutive element for the description of the behavior of responsive environments and artifacts, and we are working with these in the Wandering Lines project that we're installing currently at the library at Northeastern, where we work with Viewpoints improvisational actors. Besides frameworks such as these, some key themes in improvisational practice are recurrent and are apt to inform the design process also. This is not an exhaustive list, but some of the ones I'm currently working on. A critical aspect of improvisational performance is the beginning, and this is of course tightly related to agency and autonomy. How to start, when to start, who starts. As there's no plan, the beginning of an action is born out of context and out of initiative. Making a first move, speaking the first word, taking initiative represents a marking of an unmarked space. Heidegger described the triangular relation between the artist, the artwork, and the art. The artist makes the artwork, but also the artwork, once conceived, makes the artist. And they both exist in virtue of a prior notion of art itself. This existential interdependence of the artist work ensures that the marking of an unmarked space in a creative act is not a unique act, but the beginning of a process that ties the artist to the working of the work that produces both the artwork and the artist, and not any one particular piece of art. In improvisation, it is not so much about creating or maintaining any one particular work of art, but rather about this openness towards a process of ongoing creation. Keeping improvisation going, up stages, trumps any structure that might emerge during the process. And this is something interesting to consider for the design of interaction with an artifact or within responsive environments. In the performing arts, improvisation happens predominantly in the form of groups and ensembles. Each performer feeds off and builds upon what the others do. And that's talking about cues and understanding form. Improvisation requires performers to be open to the information that surrounds them, to be ready to engage with it, to initiate action based on it, and to enter into a dialogue with it. Improvisation performers not only pick up on gestures, sequences played and acted by their fellow performers, but they also develop a capability to recognize form when it is in the making, picking up on these cues. Improvisational actors do not only read the initial movement of actors' hand gestures as such, but they attribute meaning to the completed form of which they see the beginning or the seed. Misunderstandings and errors are constructive elements in improvisation. They're the noise that leads to the emergence of new structures also. To point to projects that work on these aspects very specifically, this one project by Greg Corness and Tekla Shiphorst is focusing on improvisational dynamics between an autonomous musical system that improvises musical tones in response to an actor's movements and behaviors, and anticipates its own musical tones by synthetic breath that characterize the piece of music that's about to come, giving the actor a cue of what's about to come. In a similar way, the mechanical ottoman, developed by Sirkin and Ju, is a project where this automated and improvising ottoman experience with lifting up briefly before they move to provide cues to present people, and again, in order to enhance the quality of unexpected interaction. How are we doing for time before I talk about time? 2 minutes? Okay, since we've got 2 minutes, let's skip the topic of time because it's been talked about often. And let's come to the last theme, that's that of otherness. The last key theme is that of otherness. In its unplanned and in-the-moment nature, improvisation deals with the unexpected and the uncontrollable. That which cannot be known, it is other from that which we know. Our culture has taught us to label the autonomy and otherness of things and creatures around us with the word wild. In The Trouble of Wilderness, William Cronon juxtaposes wildness, which he refers to as the uncontrollable, potentially dangerous, wilderness, the seemingly natural but curated by man. Think of national parks, protected landscapes, etc. The otherness that Cronon attributes to wildness relates to the capital O otherness in Jacques Lacan, the provocative, perturbing enigma of the other as an unknowable, which is different from Lacan's lowercase o other, which is used when referring to other as an alter ego that's often imagined to be like oneself. The questions that our nostalgia for wilderness raise for Cronon are profound. They point us to ask whether the other must always bend to our will, and if not, under what circumstances it should be allowed to flourish without our intervention. The concept of wildness for Cronon is one that follows its own rules, not fully understood by man, be it vegetation, things, or others. It evolves in response to many factors also other than man. Folding the rich art and practice of improvisation into the way we look at the design of interactions in today's hybrid environments, urban environments, means embracing this notion of the other. It means allowing for otherness, allowing for the unexpected and the unforeseeable, and turning to improvisation means adopting a perspective that within the predominant focus of probability and planning opens up spaces with an emphasis on possibility and preparation. Thank you.